The sun had slipped low behind the hills when the drifter came riding out of the canyon. The air was still, the kind of still that makes a man feel like the world forgot to keep breathing. His horse moved slow along the ridge trail. Each hoof step pressed soft into the dry earth. There was no sound except the faint rasp of wind and the whisper of leather against saddle. The drifter had been on the trail for days, and the dust had long settled into his skin. He was used to silence. He wore it like an old coat. Down below, a small clearing opened among the pines. There stood a cabin leaning slightly to one side, the roof patched in places with rough timber. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney, though no light showed inside. It looked like a place where someone had once hoped to make a life, but gave up halfway. The drifter slowed his horse and watched. The quiet pressed around him heavier than before. He dismounted and let the reins hang loose. The air felt colder here, though. The sun had not yet dropped completely. As he stepped closer, the wind stirred just enough to make the front door creak open a little. That was when he saw it. A scrap of paper nailed to the wood just above the latch. The paper had curled from rain and time. The words were written in a hand that trembled. He leaned close and read it by the fading light. "Please help me. Whoever finds this, I cannot last another night." There was no name, just that one plea carved in ink that had run where tears must have fallen. The drifter stood still a long time. His eyes moved over the door, the porch, the window beside it. Nothing stirred inside. He reached for the latch and pushed. The door gave way easy. The cabin smelled of cold ashes and something else. Something like fear that had soaked into the walls. A chair lay tipped on its side. There was a quilt on the floor and a cracked lamp on the table. Near the far wall, a small figure sat curled against the boards. It was a girl, maybe 16, her hair tangled and dull, her skin pale under the dirt. She did not move when he stepped in. Her eyes were open though, wide and distant, like she had already seen too much. He spoke soft. "You all right, Miss?" She blinked but said nothing. The drifter moved slow, kept his hands low where she could see them. He knelt beside her. There was a note clutched in her hand, crumpled tight. He waited, then gently eased it free. The same shaky writing. He said he would come back, but he never did. The drifter looked around the room again. There were 2 plates on the table. One broken, one untouched. The kind of mess that happens when hope leaves sudden. He set the note down and reached into his coat for a canteen. The girl watched him but did not flinch. When he offered it, she lifted it slow and drank like she had forgotten how. Outside, the wind changed direction. It carried a faint smell of rain from the mountains. The drifter felt the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. He had come this way by chance, or maybe something older than chance had brought him here. He spoke again, soft as before. No one else around. The girl shook her head once. Then she whispered, her voice thin. "He left 3 nights ago. Said he was going to town. Said he'd bring food. But he didn't come back." Her words trembled as she spoke them. The drifter could hear the ache that had built from waiting. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "All right." He stood and looked toward the door. The sun had gone down completely now. Night crept through the trees outside. He could feel the cold coming. There were rules on the trail. Rules a man didn't write but lived by anyway. You don't leave a soul behind when they've already been forgotten once. He turned back to her. "There's a fire pit outside," he said. "I'll get it going. You stay here where it's warm." She nodded again, small and unsure. The drifter stepped out and gathered what dry wood he could find near the porch. His hands moved steady, practiced. Soon a flame caught and the smell of burning pine filled the air. The light flickered across the clearing, chasing the shadows back into the trees. He stood by the fire a moment, staring at the door. The image of that note still fresh in his mind. The words, "I cannot last another night," had a weight that did not lift easy. When he stepped back inside, the girl had moved closer to the hearth. She had pulled the quilt around her shoulders. Her eyes looked different now, not safe yet, but no longer lost entirely. He sat down near the door and took off his hat. "You got a name?" She hesitated before speaking. "Lydia." He nodded once. "That's a good name." She looked at him then, really looked at "What's yours?" He took a breath. "Doesn't much matter. Folks just call me the drifter." There was a silence between them then, the kind that isn't empty but full of something neither can name. Outside, the fire crackled. An owl called from somewhere deep in the woods. The night pressed close around the cabin, but inside there was a thin light of warmth beginning to grow. The drifter leaned back against the wall and watched the shadows move across the floor. He didn't know who had left that note, or what story had broken this girl's world apart. But he knew one thing, clear as the stars outside. He wasn't leaving her here alone. Not tonight. And as the wind carried the scent of rain and pine through the cracks in the wall, he thought maybe this was the reason he had been riding so long without direction. Maybe this was where the road had been leading all along. The rain came before dawn. First a soft hiss on the roof, then the steady drum of a storm that had been waiting for days. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned low. The drifter rose from where he had been resting against the wall. His back ached from the floor, but he said nothing. He fed another piece of wood into the coals and watched the orange light breathe back to life. Lydia still slept near the hearth. Her face looked younger when the fear was gone from it. The quilt had slipped from her shoulder and he pulled it back up with quiet hands. Outside, the world blurred into gray. The drifter listened to it a while. The sound of rain on a lonely roof has a way of talking to a man about everything he never said out loud. When she woke, the first thing she did was look toward the door like she expected someone else to be standing there. Then her eyes found him. He nodded once and poured a little water into a tin cup. She took it and drank slow. "You eat anything in 2 days?" he asked. She shook her head. He opened his saddlebag and brought out a small bundle of dried meat and hard bread. He softened it in the pan over the fire until it gave off a faint smell of smoke. She ate in silence, but he could see the way her hands shook when she lifted each piece. Hunger had a deeper reach than just the stomach. After a while she spoke. "He was my brother. The one who left." The drifter said nothing. He waited. "He said he was going to town for flour. We had a horse, but he took it. Said he'd be back by nightfall. Next morning I found the note I wrote him still on the table. I think he left for good." Her eyes dropped to the floorboards. The rain outside grew heavier. The drifter stirred the fire and spoke low. "Towns today's that way if you walk. 3. If the river rises, no man leaves a girl alone that far from help without reason." She nodded like she already knew that truth but did not want to speak it. He looked toward his gear. "I can take you there once the weather clears. We'll see if anyone's seen him." For a moment she looked afraid again. "I don't want to go back. Folks there knew our P.A. They don't look kindly on his name." The drifter studied her face. "What did he do?" She hesitated, then answered quiet. "He drank. Fought anyone who looked at him wrong. One winter he never came home. After that it was just me and my brother. Folks said we were cursed." The drifter nodded slow. "People talk easy when they don't carry a burden." She looked at him with a faint spark of curiosity. "You talk like a preacher." He almost smiled. "No preacher ever stayed on a horse as long as I have." The rain kept falling. Hours passed like a dream half remembered. They spoke little. Sometimes silence tells more than words ever can. By afternoon the wind began to settle. The drifter stepped outside to check his horse. The clearing had turned to mud. Water pooled under the porch. He could smell wet pine and earth. He looked toward the trail that wound out of the valley. The mist hung low across it like a warning not to travel yet. When he came back in, Lydia was sitting by the window. She held the note she had found on her brother's bed. Her lips moved, though no sound came. He set his hat on the table and sat across from her. "You believe he's still alive?" She looked up. "I don't know, but I have to." The drifter watched her for a long time. Something in her eyes reminded him of another face long ago. A woman by a river who had waited for him to come back from a war that never truly ended. He never did. He reached for the old lamp and lit it. The glow filled the cabin with a warmer hue. "Hope's a stubborn thing," he said. "Sometimes it keeps us breathing when nothing else will." That night the rain stopped. The air grew still again, heavy with the scent of wet grass. Lydia slept easier. The drifter sat by the fire cleaning his revolver. He wasn't expecting trouble, but trouble never asked permission. In the quiet he found himself thinking about the note on the door. Whoever had nailed it there wanted someone to find her. Maybe it was the brother's doing, maybe it was someone else's mercy. Either way it had reached him. When morning came, the sky cleared wide and blue. Mist clung to the trees, but the sun broke through slow. The drifter saddled his horse and packed what little food they had. Lydia watched him from the doorway. "You mean to leave?" He shook his head. "Not without you. We'll ride out. See if the town holds any answers. You can decide what to do once we find the truth." She hesitated. "What if they don't want me there?" "Then we move on." She studied him like she wanted to understand why a stranger would care at all. Finally she stepped forward and pulled the door shut behind her. The air smelled clean after the rain. The path ahead was soft with mud. The drifter helped her onto the horse. He walked beside, leading the reins slow. The valley opened before them, wide and endless. The sound of water dripping from the trees followed them down the trail. They passed a field where wildflowers had begun to rise through the dirt. Lydia reached out and brushed one with her fingertips. Her eyes softened a little. "You always wander alone?" she asked. "Most times," he said. "Some roads don't fit 2 sets of footsteps. Why keep riding then?" He thought about that a long while before answering. "Because stopping hurts worse." The road curved along the ridge. In the distance they could see the thin line of smoke from another homestead. He led the horse toward it. As they neared, Lydia drew the quilt tighter around her shoulders. The drifter noticed the way her gaze shifted, uneasy. "What is it?" She pointed. "That's where he went for work sometimes. A rancher named Harlan. Mean man used to come by when our PA was gone. I didn't like the way he looked at me." The drifter's eyes narrowed. "We'll just ask about your brother. Nothing more." When they reached the gate, he tied the horse to a post and walked to the porch. The boards creaked under his boots. He called out but got no answer. The door stood ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco and whiskey. The place looked recently lived in but empty now. On the table lay a single photograph, a man in a white hat beside a boy who looked a lot like Lydia. She stepped in behind him and froze. "That's him. That's my brother." The drifter lifted the photo. "Looks like he worked here." Lydia's voice shook. "Then why would he leave me?" He set the photo down gentle. "Sometimes a man runs from his own shame faster than he runs from danger. They searched the cabin a little more and found a half-written letter near the bed. The first line read, "Lydia, I'm sorry." The rest was smudged from water or tears. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint smell of horses and smoke from somewhere farther down the trail. The drifter looked that way, eyes narrowing. "Someone's out there," he said. Lydia's face went pale. "You think it's him?" He didn't answer, he just watched the horizon. Whatever came next, he knew this road wasn't done with either of them yet. The wind carried a stillness that did not feel right. The drifter stood in the doorway and watched the horizon where the smoke had faded into the pale morning light. Lydia waited beside the horse. Her eyes searched the same line of trees as his, though what each of them feared might be waiting there was different. He walked back toward her and spoke low. "If it's your brother, we'll find him. If it's someone else, we'll still find the truth." She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly on the reins. The drifter led the horse forward. The trail narrowed between the trees and the air grew cooler. Birds had gone quiet. Somewhere far off a single crow called, and then silence again. They rode slow for a mile or more until the trees opened into a meadow. There in the wet grass lay the ashes of a fire still warm. He crouched and ran his hand through it. "Someone left at dawn." Lydia looked around. "Why would my brother come here?" The drifter pointed to a set of tracks leading south. He wasn't alone. 2 horses, maybe 3. Could be he got himself tied in with the wrong kind of men. She bit her lip. He wouldn't. He said nothing. Sometimes silence was kinder than the truth. They followed the tracks until noon. The trail bent toward a dry creek bed where the sun caught on something half buried in the sand. The drifter stepped down to see it was a small tin badge, the kind a deputy might wear. Old and bent, the name scratched away. He pocketed it without a word. When he climbed back up, Lydia was watching him close. "You've seen this kind of thing before." He met her eyes. Too many times. They pressed on. The land rolled wide and quiet again. Clouds gathered low in the east, but no rain came. Lydia's voice broke the silence. "Why do you help me?" He thought on that a while before speaking. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it." She waited for more, but he didn't say it. Some stories stay locked because speaking them would open old wounds too deep to close again. By late day they reached the edge of an abandoned line shack near the river. The roof sagged, but the walls still held. The drifter led the horse inside and unpacked what food was left. Lydia gathered wood while he struck a spark. When the fire caught, the light warmed her face, and for the first time he saw color return to her cheeks. She sat quiet for a long time, watching the flames. Then she spoke in a voice just above a whisper. "I used to come down to the river with my brother. We'd throw stones and talk about leaving this valley. He said he'd buy me a blue dress when we got to the city." The drifter stirred the coals with a stick. "Dreams are heavy things to carry when the world gives you nothing to hold them up." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you've lost a few yourself." He looked into the fire and saw faces he hadn't seen in years. A man can lose everything but still have a choice about what he does next. Night came slow. The river murmured outside and firelight flickered against the wooden walls. Lydia leaned her head against the log behind her and closed her eyes. The drifter watched her breathing settle. For a moment, he felt a peace he hadn't known since the war took the last of what he cared for. He stepped outside when she slept. The moon hung low over the water. He listened to the current and the faint rustle of leaves. That was when he saw it, another fire far downriver, a small orange flicker moving slow like a camp being broken. He stood there a long time, the weight of the badge heavy in his pocket. When he came back in, he sat by the fire again and let his eyes rest on the girl. She looked small beneath the quilt, but there was strength in the way she slept, like someone who had survived more than most ever would. Morning brought the call of crows again. Lydia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of him packing the horse. "We're heading that way," he said, pointing downriver. "Someone was camping there last night." She nodded without question. They rode until the sun was high. The river glinted beside them like a silver thread winding through the grass. After an hour they found what he had seen. The remains of a camp, ashes still faintly warm, and beside them a boot print pressed deep into the mud. Lydia knelt and traced it with her fingers. "That's his," she said. The drifter studied the print. "He was here less than a day ago." They searched the area and found a torn piece of cloth caught on a branch, the same color as the shirt in the photograph. Lydia held it tight. "He's still alive." The drifter nodded, but his jaw tightened. There were other signs too, tracks from 2 more horses circling the camp, and marks of a struggle. Whoever her brother had been with it hadn't ended peaceful. He stood and looked down the valley where the tracks led. "He's heading toward the old trading post. It's 2 days' ride, but we can make it by tomorrow night." Lydia's voice softened. "Why are you doing this for him when you don't even know him?" He looked toward the hills. "Because maybe he's not the only one who needs saving." They set out again. The sun dipped low behind them, turning the grass to gold. Lydia's shoulders straightened as they rode. The drifter could see a quiet strength building in her. Every mile seemed to lift another layer of fear. That night they camped near a stand of junipers. The fire crackled low and the air smelled of resin and smoke. Lydia watched him as he fixed the saddle straps. "You ever think of settling down somewhere?" she asked. He smiled a little. "I used to, but the land has a way of keeping what it owns. Every time I tried to stay, the road called me back." Maybe this time will be different. He looked at her then and for a moment saw a glimpse of the life he might have had if things had gone another way. A cabin, a quiet morning, someone waiting at the window, maybe, he said. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled. The drifter reached for his rifle and laid it across his knees. Lydia watched the darkness. You think they're close? Closer than I'd like. The firelight danced on her face. She looked at him and whispered, I'm not afraid anymore. He nodded. That's how you know you're still alive. The night stretched long and quiet. Above them the stars burned cold and clear. For the first time in a long while, the drifter felt that he wasn't just moving toward another horizon. He was walking beside something worth protecting. And somewhere deep in that silence between the crack of the fire and the song of the river, he began to understand that this road wasn't just leading her to safety. It was leading him home in ways he hadn't thought possible. By the next evening, the trading post came into view through a haze of dust and wind. It sat alone at the edge of a dry plain, its roof sagging under years of storms. A faded sign creaked above the door. Once it had been a place of barter and travelers' tales. Now it looked more like a ghost holding on to what little memory it had left. The drifter pulled his horse to a stop and watched the place a while before speaking. We go slow. Eyes open. Lydia nodded. Her face was set with quiet resolve. The girl who had once trembled beneath the nailed note now carried herself like someone who had decided to stand her ground no matter the cost. They tied the horses behind the post and stepped inside. The smell of old dust and kerosene filled the air. Behind the counter sat a man with a beard gone gray and eyes that had seen too much. He looked up from his ledger and studied them both. Don't get many folks this side of the river, he said. The drifter tipped his hat. Just passing through. Looking for a man. Might have come by yesterday. Young brown hair. Worn jacket. The old man's eyes flickered. Plenty of young men passed through. Most of them running from something. Lydia stepped forward. Please. His name's Samuel. He's my brother. The man's expression softened. He rubbed a hand through his beard and nodded toward the back. He was here left this morning. Weren't alone though. Had two fellas with him, mean ones. I didn't ask their business. Didn't want the trouble. Which way? The drifter asked. The man pointed toward the foothills. Headed up to the mines. Said something about striking it rich. But I heard the way they talked. Didn't sound like mining. The drifter set a coin on the counter. Thank you. As they turned to leave, the old man called after them. You find that boy. Tell him he's walking a road that ends bad. Some roads don't have a way back. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust swept across the plain in long, low waves. Lydia looked toward the hills. The mines are empty. Why would he go there? The drifter tightened the cinch on his horse. Because men who want to hide go where no one else does. They rode until twilight. The land rose slowly, the ground turning to rock and shale. A rusted track cut through the cliffs, leading toward the dark mouth of the old mine. By the time they reached it, the sun was gone. Only a pale blue light lingered in the sky. The drifter stopped and listened. The air carried a faint echo, metal against stone. Voices low and rough. He motioned for Lydia to stay back. Keep quiet. If things go bad, you take the horse and ride north. Don't look back. She shook her head. I'm not leaving you. He met her eyes and saw something fierce there. The same quiet strength that had kept her alive through all the storms before this one. He gave a short nod. Then stay close. They moved toward the mine entrance. The sound grew clearer now. Laughter, a curse, the clink of bottles. Inside, the shadows shifted against the firelight. 3 figures sat near a small blaze. One of them was young and thin, his hands tied in front of him. Lydia gasped. Samuel, the drifter, motioned for her to wait. He stepped forward slow, his boots barely making a sound. The 2 men nearest the fire looked up. One reached for his rifle. The drifter spoke first. Don't. The tone of his voice made both freeze. Calm but heavy, like a storm about to break. The taller man spat into the dirt. Who the hell are you? Just someone looking to take the girl's brother home. The man laughed. Ain't how this works, friend. Boy owes us money, a lot of it. We're taking him to collect debts between him and you. Doesn't have to end with blood. The second man grinned. Always does. The drifter's hand hovered near his holster. The fire cracked. The world held its breath. Then the tall man moved first. The flash came fast and bright. A single shot tore through the stillness. When the echo faded to men lay on the ground, the smell of gunpowder hanging thick in the air. Lydia ran forward and dropped beside her brother. Samuel, are you hurt? He looked up at her with hollow eyes. They said they'd kill you if I didn't go with them. I didn't know what else to do. She held him tight. It's over. You're safe now. The drifter reloaded his revolver and watched the fire burn low. Safe's a word that doesn't last long out here. We need to move. They left the mine before dawn. The boy could barely walk, so the drifter lifted him onto his horse. Lydia followed on foot, her hand resting on the saddle for balance. The sky turned pale and the first birds began to stir. After a mile, Samuel spoke. You didn't have to help me. You don't even know us. The drifter looked straight ahead. Sometimes knowing ain't required. Doing what's right is. They reached the river again by afternoon. The water shimmered under the light. Lydia helped her brother down and knelt beside him. He was weak but breathing steady. The drifter filled a tin cup and handed it to him. Drink, you'll need your strength. Samuel took it and stared into the water. I did bad things. Worked for men I shouldn't have. I thought I could make it right if I paid them back. But every time I tried, the hole just got deeper. The drifter sat beside him. That's how the world traps a man. But it's not the falling that ruins him. It's staying down when someone offers a hand. Samuel looked at him with something like shame and gratitude tangled together. Why do you care what happens to us? The drifter's gaze wandered toward the horizon. Because once there was someone I couldn't save. I've been walking ever since, trying to make peace with that. Lydia listened quietly, her eyes softened. You already have. He didn't answer. Some truths don't need words. They camped near the river again that night. The wind was gentle, the air warm. Lydia hummed a tune she remembered from childhood while Samuel slept. The drifter leaned back against a rock and let the sound wash over him. For the first time in years, his thoughts were still. When she stopped humming, she looked over at him. What will you do now? He smiled faintly. Keep moving, I reckon. That's what I do. You could stay. There's room at the farm. We could rebuild. He stared at the fire a long time. Some men are made for staying, others for walking, but I'll stay long enough to see you both safe. The moon climbed high. Reflections danced across the water like ghosts of all the things left behind. The drifter felt something shift inside him, a quiet release he hadn't known he was holding. When sleep finally came, it was deep and untroubled. He dreamed of open fields, sunlight through tall grass, laughter that didn't echo with loss. By dawn, the river mist had lifted. The world smelled new again. The drifter saddled his horse and watched the two of them stirring by the fire. Lydia smiled when she saw him. You don't have to go yet. He looked at her with kind eyes. No, but I will soon. She stepped closer. Will we ever see you again? He placed his hat over his heart. If the road allows. For a moment they stood there in the quiet morning light. Three souls bound by something deeper than blood, a shared piece of redemption carved out of the dust and sorrow of the frontier. The drifter turned toward the west. The sun rose behind him, painting the land in gold. He didn't look back. Some goodbyes are meant to be silent because the heart already understands what words can't carry. And though he rode alone, the emptiness he once carried had changed. It wasn't a burden now, but a space, one that held forgiveness. And the faint echo of a girl's voice whispering that even the lost could find their way home again. The drifter rode west through a field of sun-bleached grass that reached to his knees. The wind moved across it like a wave upon water. Every sway shimmered with gold in the early light. He felt the weight of the night lift with each mile. Behind him lay the river and the small campfire that still smoked faintly against the dawn. Ahead stretched the long road that never ended. He didn't hurry. Men who have walked with ghosts learn there is no reason to rush. The world will wait for you if you let it. For a while he thought only of the rhythm of his horse's hooves and the whisper of the wind. Then his mind drifted to the girl and her brother. He wondered if they had eaten, if they had begun to mend the roof, if the sound of laughter would someday return to that lonely porch where the note had hung. He smiled a little at the thought. Maybe that was enough. Maybe saving one small corner of the world could still mean something. By midday he came upon a ridge where the land opened wide and far. From up there you could see the valley stretching for miles. It was the kind of view that made a man quiet inside. He stopped and let his horse rest. The sun sat high and warm. A hawk circled in the distance. The world felt endless again. He dismounted and knelt by a patch of wild sage. The scent rose sweet and strong. He closed his eyes and remembered a woman's voice from long ago. The memory was faint now, but kind. It reminded him that not every loss needs to hurt forever. When he rose, he looked once more toward the valley. Then he turned his horse north and started down the other side. He rode 2 more days before reaching the next town. It was little more than a cluster of weathered buildings and a single street lined with dust. A bell hung outside the small church at the edge. Children played near the well. The sound of their laughter carried through the warm air. The drifter stopped at the trough outside the stable. He let his horse drink and then went inside. The keeper looked up from brushing a mule. Been a while since I seen your face around here. The drifter nodded, just passing through. Most men say that, the keeper said. You mean it? He smiled but didn't answer. Later he found a quiet corner near the saloon and sat with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He listened to the murmur of voices from inside, the creak of a door, the shuffle of boots on the porch. Life went on the way it always did, slow, stubborn, unbothered by what any one man carried in his heart. He thought again of Lydia and her brother. Maybe they would fix that roof. Maybe they would plant something in the spring. Maybe the house would stand a little stronger than before. He liked believing that. As evening came, a traveler stopped near his table. A young woman with a guitar slung across her back. She asked if the seat beside him was free. He nodded. It's yours. She sat and smiled. You look like a man with stories, maybe 1 or 2. People like me collect stories, she said. Keeps the road from feeling empty. He studied her a moment. And what do you do with the ones you collect? I sing them, she said. Makes them live a little longer. He nodded again. Then here's one worth singing. And so he told her about the farmhouse, the note, the girl left behind, the long road that brought them together. the brother lost and found. He told it plain, without pride or drama, the way truth sounds when it's spoken by a man who has seen enough of the world to know how fragile good things are. When he finished, she was silent. Her eyes glistened with that quiet kind of awe people feel when they hear something real. "Did it happen just like that?" she asked. "Close enough," he said. She smiled. "Then I'll make sure it don't get forgotten." He tipped his hat. "That's all any story ever asks." They parted before nightfall. The young woman walked toward the tavern where the music came from, and the drifter saddled his horse once more. The sun had already dipped behind the ridge, leaving a faint purple glow across the sky. He rode west again, always west. That was his way. As the night deepened, the stars came out one by one, scattered like dust across an endless black plain. Somewhere out there, in that same vast darkness, Lydia would be lighting a lantern in her window. Her brother would be mending fence posts, his hand steady again. The house would breathe with life, not sorrow. The drifter imagined the wind carrying her song through the fields, soft, clear, and grateful. He didn't need to hear the words to understand them. They spoke of kindness and mercy and the strange way redemption finds its path through broken lives. He rode on until the moon rose high. Then he stopped at a hill where the land fell away to a river far below. The water shone silver. He sat there a long time just listening. In that quiet he found what he'd been searching for all those years, not forgiveness from someone else, but from himself. He thought of all the faces he'd passed, all the towns left behind, all the empty nights. Each one had led him here. Each one had taught him that sometimes the smallest act, a ride through a storm, a meal shared, a single moment of mercy could change the shape of a soul. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "She'll be fine now." The wind carried the words away, but that didn't matter. The land had heard them, and that was enough. By morning he was gone. Some said they saw him riding west along the ridge, where the sun broke clean over the hills. Others swore they found his horse grazing by a spring, the saddle empty. Folks talked about him in quiet tones, the nameless drifter who came from nowhere and left behind peace instead of trouble. Lydia told her children the story years later, how a stranger had appeared one night like a ghost out of the storm and changed everything. She would point to the spot where the note once hung and say, "That's where grace found its way to our door." And sometimes, when the wind swept across the plains just right, the children claimed they could hear hooves in the distance and a man's voice low and steady as the earth itself. They never knew his name, but they remembered his kindness. And in the West, where time moves slow and stories live longer than men, that was enough. For out there among the endless fields and fading light, every soul carries a note nailed to their door, some written in sorrow, some in guilt, some in hope. But every now and then, if the road is kind, a drifter passes by and reads it, and chooses to answer, not with judgment, but with grace. And that choice, quiet and unseen, becomes the one thing the world remembers when the dust settles and the sky grows still.